Tonight, as the hush of evening settles like soft velvet across the world, I invite you to journey back in time to the soot-darkened streets and frost-bitten alleys of Victorian England, where winter's breath could be as merciless as it was beautiful. Imagine gas lamps flickering against drifting snow, their pale halos quivering in the icy wind. Somewhere, a church bell tolls through the fog, its echoes stretching like ghostly fingers across cobblestones slick with frost. This is the story of why Victorian winters were deadly for the poor, of families huddling under thin blankets, of children's laughter turning to brittle coughs, and of quiet acts of kindness blooming even in the coldest nights. It is a story of endurance, of struggle, and of the fragile warmth that hope can bring when the world outside turns unforgiving. Before we begin, I want to welcome all of you from the US, Europe, Asia, Africa, Oceania, and every corner of the globe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is there. Your presence connects this moment across oceans and time zones. If you haven't yet, like this video, subscribe for more journeys into history, and leave a comment to share your thoughts or memories as you listen. Take a moment to settle in, dim the lights, wrap yourself in something warm, perhaps sip a gentle tea or cocoa. Let your breathing slow, your muscles soften, and your mind open. When you're ready, we'll step softly into the story together. The fog rolled in off the Thames like a living creature, silent and implacable, creeping through alleys and climbing up the sides of soot-stained buildings until the city seemed to dissolve into grayness. Gas lamps flickered in its grasp, their light swallowed and reshaped into trembling halos that barely touched the cobblestones below. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tower tolled the late hour. Its sound carried strangely, warped by the damp air, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The streets of the East End were nearly deserted now. A lone cartwheel creaked as a ragged man pushed his barrow of coal through a lane glazed with thin ice. Each of his footsteps echoed sharply, the sound brittle as a snapped twig, and faded quickly into the shroud of mist. The air smelled of wet brick, coal smoke, and something faintly acrid, perhaps cabbage boiled too long behind a shuttered window. The faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's abandoned cart lingered like a ghost of comfort that the poor could rarely afford. In one of the tallest, most tired-looking tenements, the windows rattled in their frames whenever a gust of wind threaded through the narrow alley. Up in a cramped attic room, the wood beams above were blackened with years of smoke. The walls were plastered unevenly, flaking in places where damp had seeped through. Eliza sat on a wooden stool beside the single, sputtering candle. She was no older than 30, but the fine lines etched around her mouth and the hollows beneath her eyes spoke of hard winters past. She tightened a threadbare shawl around her shoulders and watched her two children curled beneath a patched quilt on the straw mattress. Their small bodies formed tiny hills under the fabric, rising and falling in the rhythm of exhausted sleep. The quilt smelled faintly of old wool and ash, a scent both familiar and comforting in its own way. A faint frost was already gathering along the inside of the single-paned window, catching the candlelight and fracturing it into delicate crystal patterns. Eliza reached over to the cold iron stove, empty now of coal, and rested her hand on its surface, as though by touch alone she could will warmth into the room. Outside, a gust of wind keened through the gaps in the roof tiles, sounding like a far-off lament. She could hear distant laughter, perhaps from a tavern 2 streets away, mingling with the sharp crack of ice as water froze in the gutters. Somewhere even farther, a caroler's voice rose and fell, soft and fragile, against the immensity of the cold. But beneath the surface of this night lay something heavier, a foreboding that settled in Eliza's chest. The cold was deepening. The barrowmen had spoken of a storm rolling in from the North Sea, crueler than any in years past. Hunger gnawed her already, a hollow ache, but she ignored it, for now there was only the fragile peace of her children's breathing, the candle's weary flame, and the silent promise of a long winter yet to be endured. By dawn, the city had transformed beneath a heavy quilt of snow, though quilt was too generous a word for what blanketed London that morning. It was not the soft, sparkling snow of storybooks, but a grayish layer, part ash, part ice, that muffled sound and made every street appear abandoned. Chimneys coughed plumes of smoke into a sky the color of tarnished pewter. The faint light that filtered through the fog seemed tired, as though even the sun begrudged its duty. Eliza awoke stiff and cold, her breath visible in the dim attic room. The children, Mary and Thomas, stirred beneath their patched quilt. Mary's small nose was red from the chill, and Thomas shivered despite being wrapped in his sister's arms. Eliza's first instinct was to check the stove, still empty, still cold, and then she glanced toward the cracked window, where the frost patterns had thickened overnight into elaborate lace. She traced one with her finger and felt the bite of ice through the glass. The world outside sounded strangely distant. The usual bustle of morning traffic was absent. No clatter of carriage wheels, no sharp calls of costermongers hawking their wares. Instead, only the occasional distant cry of a gull or the muted creak of a cartwheel reached her ears. Somewhere a door slammed, followed by the muffled bark of a hungry dog. She dressed the children quickly, layering their thin shirts and woolens, then tied scarves around their necks. She knew they would need food before the day was far spent, and to get food, she would have to venture out. Her stomach cramped as she thought of the few coins hidden in a tin beneath the floorboard, a sum too small for both coal and bread. The hallway outside their attic was dim and smelled of damp wood and boiled turnips. Other tenants' doors were closed tight, though faint coughs and a baby's thin wail seeped through the cracks. As they descended the narrow, groaning stairs, Mary clutched her mother's skirt, while Thomas held her hand, his small fingers icy even through her gloves. When the door finally creaked open to the outside, a blast of frigid air swept in, stealing their breath. The street was nearly empty, except for a thin man with frost in his beard pushing a cart of firewood and an elderly woman hunched over her cane, her boots leaving shallow impressions in the dirty snow. The smell of the city was different now, colder, cleaner in places where the snow covered the grime, but with an undercurrent of cold smoke and damp stone. Eliza guided the children toward Whitechapel Market, the snow crunching softly beneath their worn boots. Each step felt deliberate, cautious, as though the world itself might splinter beneath them. Overhead, a crow flew, its dark shape stark against the pale sky, and though the morning was harsh, there was a faint, fragile beauty in the way the frost sparkled on the iron railings and in how the distant bells of St. Mary's chimed through the fog. The journey to Whitechapel Market was slower than usual. Each step labored beneath the weight of snow that had frozen overnight into a brittle crust. The cobblestones beneath were slick, and the children's breath rose like steam as they trudged beside their mother. Their boots, worn thin at the soles, let in little pricks of cold with every step, as though the winter itself reached up through the stones to test their resolve. The city seemed muffled, as if the snow had swallowed all sound. Even the horses that occasionally went by did so in a strangely subdued manner, their hooves softened by the slush. Icicles hung like glass daggers from the eaves of shuttered shops, and every once in a while a shard would fall, shattering against the ground with a faint, crystalline chime. As they rounded a corner, the market came into view, a sparse scattering of vendors who had braved the bitter morning. Their stalls were little more than wooden tables draped with damp canvas, their wares pitiful in number. A fishmonger displayed two pale, glistening haddock on a bed of half-frozen seaweed. A baker had a basket of hard rolls, their crusts cracked from the cold. The smell of yeast and smoke drifted faintly, thin and teasing, but even that simple scent seemed distant, as if it belonged to another life. Mary's stomach growled audibly, and Thomas tugged at his mother's sleeve, his cheeks flushed from both hunger and cold. Eliza's eyes darted toward the baker's basket, then to the small pouch of coins in her pocket. The weight of those coins seemed both precious and hopelessly inadequate. She would need to decide: coal for the stove to keep her children from freezing tonight, or bread to quiet their aching bellies. Now, a gust of wind swept through the market, lifting a sheet of snow into the air like a wave of white dust. The sound of distant church bells floated across the rooftops, delicate yet steady, a reminder that somewhere in the city life continued undisturbed in warm, candlelit parlors. But here in the market, each transaction was a quiet struggle, a test of endurance against a season that showed no mercy. A vendor selling kindling caught Eliza's eye, a wiry man with cracked hands and a face lined by years of cold mornings. He gave her a knowing look, one of shared hardship, and tipped his cap, the smallest of gestures, but it reminded her that even in this frost-bitten world, there was still humanity, still kindness flickering like a stubborn flame against the wind. Eliza paused before the baker's stall, her gloved fingers brushing over the pouch of coins hidden deep in her coat pocket. The rolls in the wicker basket were pale and hard, their crusts cracked like parched earth. A faint wisp of steam curled from one, perhaps just removed from a nearby oven, and the smell, rich, yeasty, almost sweet, cut through the dull tang of cold smoke that clung to the market air. For a moment, she closed her eyes and simply breathed it in, letting the warmth of the scent trick her stomach into a fleeting sense of comfort. Mary's small hand tugged gently at her sleeve. Mom, can we? The girl's voice trailed off as she swallowed her words, her blue eyes wide with both longing and the understanding of their situation. Beside her, Thomas's lips were slightly chapped, his cheeks flushed pink beneath his woolen scarf. He didn't speak, but the way he shifted from one cold foot to another told Eliza all she needed to know. The baker, a stout woman with a kerchief tied snugly over her gray-streaked hair, regarded Eliza with a mix of weariness and quiet sympathy. "Sixpence for two," she said softly, her voice carrying a note that suggested she might take less if pressed. But Eliza knew pride was a fragile thing in this market. Too much pity could wound just as easily as hunger. Beyond the stalls, the market's edges blurred into a maze of alleys and narrow streets. Somewhere to the west, a carriage rattled past, its wheels crunching over frozen ruts. A distant shout echoed, followed by the barking of a stray dog. The city was alive, but it felt like a hushed, watchful thing this morning, as if even London itself was conserving energy against the cold. Eliza finally handed over 3 coins and received a single roll, hard but still warm at the center. She broke it in half, the steam rising briefly before the bitter air stole it away. Mary and Thomas each took a piece, their small fingers trembling as they held on to that fleeting heat. The taste was plain, but heavenly, soft at the core, and for a moment their faces softened into shy smiles. The kindling seller nodded again as they passed, his gaze lingering as though silently willing them strength. Eliza tucked her shawl closer, her shoulders squared against the wind that swept suddenly through the market square. The storm on the horizon was moving closer. The clouds above had darkened to a bruised gray, and a new edge of sharpness cut through the air, like a whisper of the hardship still to come. The sky had deepened into a restless gray by the time Eliza and her children turned toward home, the first stray snowflakes beginning to drift lazily down. They landed soundlessly on her shawl, melting almost instantly against the faint warmth of her body. But when she glanced at the rooftops, she could see white already collecting along the slates. The storm had quickened its pace. The streets felt quieter now. A few vendors were hastily packing their wares, canvas flaps snapping in the sharp wind. A chimney sweep, blackened from head to toe, passed by with a quick nod, his ladder slung over one shoulder. A young boy in an oversized coat was darting between doorways, offering to shovel snow for a penny. Somewhere behind them, a church bell tolled the hour, its notes softened by the thickening air. Mary and Thomas walked close to their mother, their steps tentative on the slick cobblestones. The air seemed sharper, biting at their cheeks and seeping through the holes in their worn boots. The smell of the market, cold smoke, cabbage, damp wood, faded behind them, replaced by the bitter tang of winter and the faint, acrid scent of chimney soot settling on the snow. They passed an alley where an old woman sat wrapped in rags, her back against a wall, her face hidden beneath a tattered shawl. She didn't speak or move as they approached, but Eliza slowed, her heart twisting. For a brief moment, she considered offering the woman a fragment of bread, but there was none left to spare. Her children's soft chewing had been quick and hungry. Even the crumbs were gone. The guilt settled like an extra weight on her shoulders, as heavy as the clouds above. Further on, the gas lamps flickered as the first true gust of the coming storm swept through the city. It howled between the narrow buildings, scattering her loose snow and tugging at Eliza's shawl until she clutched it tightly. A sign above a shuttered bakery creaked on its hinges, groaning in protest against the wind. As they reached the corner nearest their tenement, Eliza glanced back at the market square. It was nearly deserted now, the stalls abandoned, the ground littered with bits of straw and trampled snow. The city's edges blurred as the fog began to roll in again, curling around the corners of buildings and swallowing the distant shapes of rooftops. And yet, amid the bleakness, there was a quiet resilience in the way London endured. The lamps still burned. A single window glowed with the flicker of a family hearth, and as Mary slipped her small hand into her mother's, Eliza felt the tiniest spark of hope warming her against the gathering storm. By the time Eliza and the children reached their narrow tenement, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, thicker now, swirling in small eddies around their legs as the wind pushed through the streets like an impatient spirit. The doorway to their building was dark and narrow, the wood swollen from damp and scarred by years of use. When she pulled it open, a puff of stale, warm air greeted them, carrying with it the mingled scent of boiled potatoes, cold smoke, and damp wool, the essence of dozens of lives crowded into a single, creaking structure. Inside, the stairwell was dim, lit only by the weak light of a single oil lamp mounted crookedly on the wall. Its flame trembled as the door closed behind them, casting restless shadows across the cracked plaster. The steps creaked beneath their feet as they climbed, each groan of wood echoing faintly upward. Somewhere below, a baby cried, a thin, reedy sound that threaded through the walls, while above an old man coughed, the wet rasp of his chest, a reminder of the illnesses that stalked buildings like this in winter. Eliza's shawl was damp from melting snow. She shook it out gently before they reached their attic door, careful not to shower the children with cold droplets. Mary's cheeks were flushed bright pink from the cold, her eyes wide as she glanced over the railing into the stairwell's depths. Thomas trailed behind, his small boots slipping slightly on a step slick with tracked-in slush. Their room, when they entered, was as they had left it. The candle burned low on the table, its flame shrinking but stubborn. Frost still curled in delicate silvery veins across the window glass. The stove remained cold, its iron belly empty. Eliza removed her gloves and flexed her stiff fingers, the joints aching from the chill. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose tiles of the roof above. Snow tapped at the window, its soft patter strangely soothing. Despite the worry gnawing at her chest, she could feel the storm growing angrier, the air pressure shifting ever so slightly, as if the world itself were bracing for the night to come. She wrapped the children in their quilt and rubbed their arms to warm them. We'll manage, she whispered, though the words were more for herself than for them. She knelt beside the stove, opened the little tin from beneath the floorboard, and stared at the few remaining coins. Their dull metal gleamed faintly in the candlelight. A meager fortune, but the only thing standing between them and the deepening cold. She would have to decide soon, return to the market tomorrow for coal, or stretch what food they could find and pray the weather softened. But as she tucked the tin away again, she allowed herself a small pause to breathe, to listen to the faint hum of the city beyond the walls, and to let her children's soft murmurs remind her that hope, however fragile, was still alive. The storm outside had grown more insistent by evening, sweeping across the city with a steady hiss of snow and wind that pressed against the windows as if searching for a way in. The light in the attic room had dimmed to the color of pewter, and the candle on the table sputtered now and then as drafts slipped through unseen cracks. The walls creaked occasionally, responding to the temperature's plunge, their groans blending with the distant moan of the gale threading through alleyways. Eliza had pulled the children close under the quilt, creating a small nest of warmth amid the chill. Mary's head rested against her mother's shoulder, her eyelids heavy but fluttering open every time the wind howled, especially loud. Thomas clutched the edge of the quilt in his little fists, his thumb rubbing absent-minded circles into the worn fabric. The three of them sat together like this for a long while, listening to the wind, to their own breathing, to the soft cracking of the wooden beams overhead. In the distance, muffled through walls and snow, a faint melody reached them, someone singing, low and hesitant, perhaps a carol. The sound wavered like a candle flame, fragile but persistent. It reminded Eliza of winters long ago, when she had been a child in her mother's cottage outside the city, when snow had been magical rather than menacing, and when fires had burned bright enough to banish the darkness. For a moment, the memory softened the room, as if the air itself had warmed slightly under the weight of remembrance, but hunger gnawed quietly at the edges of her thought, and worry sharpened every sound. The coin tin beneath the floor seemed to whisper its inadequacy. Tomorrow, she would need to decide food or fuel. The choice was as stark and unforgiving as the winter sky. Mary stirred beside her and whispered, "Mom, will the snow stop by morning?" Her voice was small, like the first flicker of a match. Eliza kissed the top of her daughter's hair, inhaling the faint scent of smoke and wool. "Perhaps," she said softly, "for it will be kinder by tomorrow." She did not speak the worry in her heart, that storms like these could linger for days. The wind rattled the window once more, harder this time, and a little cascade of powdered frost fell from the sill onto the floor. Yet even then there was beauty in it, the delicate crystals catching the candlelight, turning the bleak room into a brief, glittering wonderland. Eliza watched the sparkle fade, then tightened her arms around her children. For this moment at least, they were together and safe within their fragile cocoon of warmth. By the following morning, the city lay beneath a deeper silence, the kind that comes when snow has settled thick and undisturbed overnight. The world outside their windows seemed almost otherworldly. Rooftops bowed under white burdens. Chimneys exhaled wisps of smoke like sleepy giants, and the sky glowed pale and uniform as though the sun had decided to hide behind a sheet of frosted glass. Eliza woke before the children, her breath visible in the dim light. For a moment, she simply listened to the muted world, to Mary's soft breathing, to the occasional creak of the beams overhead as the wood adjusted to the cold. The storm had passed, but it had left a stillness that felt as fragile as thin ice. She rose quietly, her bare feet recoiling from the icy floorboards, and crossed to the window. Her fingertips traced the intricate lacework of frost clinging to the glass. Outside, a milkman trudged through knee-deep snow, his metal containers clinking faintly with each careful step. A lone crow flew overhead, its black wings stark against the white, its caw sounding sharper for the muffled world below. Mary stirred, blinking awake, her hair tangled and cheeks flushed. "Is it still snowing?" she murmured. Eliza smiled faintly and shook her head. "Not now, love, but the streets are deep with it." Thomas yawned, rubbing his eyes with small fists, his face still soft with sleep. They shared the last crust of bread from yesterday's purchase, its texture hard and its taste bland but comforting. Eliza dipped her piece into a cup of lukewarm water to soften it, while Mary and Thomas nibbled quietly, their small fingers pink from the chill. The smell of cold smoke wafted faintly from neighboring rooms, a reminder of the warmth they lacked. She knew she would have to venture out again. The coins beneath the floorboard would barely stretch, but without coal, the cold would creep deeper into their bones tonight. She dressed the children in their layered garments and wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Before they stepped out, she paused to listen once more to the distant church bells, to the faint clatter of a cart somewhere far off. Even in hardship, the city's heartbeat continued. When they opened the tenement door, a gust of icy air greeted them, sharper than before. The street outside was transformed. Snowdrifts leaned against doorways like silent sentries, and the tracks of early risers crisscrossed the whiteness like faint scars. The air smelled clean, almost sweet, but beneath it lingered the familiar tang of soot and smoke, a reminder that even beauty in this city was edged with hardship. The snow crunched beneath their feet with a muffled, satisfying sound, each step leaving a clear imprint that seemed to dissolve slowly under the weight of the morning chill. The city had changed overnight, softened by the storm, yet somehow more severe in its silence. Icicles dangled from the eaves like delicate glass daggers, and as Eliza led her children along the narrow lane, a single drop of water fell from one, splashing coldly onto her wrist before freezing almost instantly. They passed a row of shuttered shops, their signs frosted over, the paint peeling where damp had gnawed at the wood. A tangle of laundry lines, long abandoned for the season, sagged beneath the weight of snow, each line sparkling faintly in the pale light. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, a sharp, lonely sound that echoed through the alleyways before fading into the stillness. At the corner, the butcher's stall stood closed, its windows fogged with frost. Eliza paused for a moment, peering through the glass, remembering a time when she might have entered without hesitation, perhaps even chosen a small joint of lamb for supper. That was before the winters had grown crueler, before each coin became a decision between heat and hunger. A group of boys scampered past, their laughter brittle and thin in the frigid air. They tossed a handful of snow toward one another, but the joy in their play was tempered by their bare fingers and threadbare coats. One boy's cough broke the laughter, lingering in the frosty air like a warning. Eliza tightened her grip on Thomas's hand and walked on. The main road toward Whitechapel Market was busier now, though busy was a relative term. A ragged vendor was already spreading a thin layer of coal dust on the street to prevent slipping, his face red from the cold. The sharp tang of burning coal filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of roasting chestnuts from a distant cart. A milk horse, its muzzle frosted white, plodded past, its breath rising in great plumes. Mary's small voice broke the quiet. "Do you think the baker will have more bread today, Mom?" Eliza glanced down at her daughter's hopeful face and forced a gentle smile. "Perhaps, love. We'll see what we can find." Inside, her heart tightened. The coins jingled faintly in her pocket, a reminder of how little they had left. Yet, even as they approached the market, with its rows of snow-dusted stalls and shivering vendors, Eliza felt a flicker of gratitude. The storm had passed. Her children were still by her side, and as the bells of St. Mary's began to chime the morning hour, their notes floated through the frozen air like a fragile promise that the city and her family would endure another day. The market had a quiet, almost fragile energy that morning. Snow clung stubbornly to the edges of the wooden stalls, and the air was filled with the muted sound of scraping boots and soft murmurs of vendors calling out their wares. A delicate haze of smoke and steam rose from a nearby kettle where a vendor was boiling cabbage for soup. mingling with the scent of damp wool and faintly sweet bread carried from the baker's stall. Eliza approached the baker, her hands tucked deep into her shawl. The woman behind the counter, cheeks pink from the cold, offered a faint nod of recognition. "Morning, Eliza. Hard night?" she asked softly, her eyes kind but weary. Eliza only shook her head, careful not to betray the worry in her chest. She counted the coins in her palm, each one heavy with significance, and selected the smallest of the rolls the baker had laid out. Mary and Thomas stood close, their breaths puffing into the cold air in small clouds. The tips of their noses were red, and Thomas's mittens had worn thin at the fingertips, leaving him to clutch the roll carefully, afraid it might slip through his frozen fingers. The bread was warm in their hands, though hard, its texture firm and dense. For a moment, they stood together, sharing the small comfort, savoring the steam as it rose and mingled with the icy morning air. Around them, the market moved slowly. A man with a cart of coal rumbled past, the scent sharp and biting. A stray cat, thin and cautious, slinked along the edge of a stall, its fur dusted with snow. Somewhere in the distance, a child cried, a high, thin sound that pierced the soft hum of activity. The city was alive, but it was alive with a quiet endurance rather than joy. Eliza took a deep breath, letting the cold fill her lungs. The streets would be difficult today, the snow drifts making each step an effort, but she had bread, she had her children, and even as the clouds thickened and the wind bit at their faces, she felt the smallest flicker of hope. They had survived another night, and the day, though harsh, had begun. The walk back through the snow-laden streets was slower than the journey to the market. Each step required careful placement, lest a hidden patch of ice send them sprawling into the freezing whiteness. The city seemed to shift under the storm's residue, drifts piled against doorways, gutters brimming with slush, and chimney smoke curling into the heavy gray sky like invisible fingers reaching for warmth. Eliza kept the children close, her arms encircling them beneath the quilt she carried over her shoulders. Mary's small hand was icy against hers. Thomas's boots left shallow prints in the snow that the wind began to blur almost immediately. A distant bell rang somewhere, its chime softened by snow, and for a moment Eliza paused to simply listen, letting the sound ground them in a city that could feel so enormous, so merciless in its cold. The smell of damp brick and coal smoke clung to the alleys they passed. A baker's discarded peel rested near a doorway, crusted with bits of flour and frozen butter. Beyond it, the faint acrid tang of a nearby chimney mingled with the clean sweetness of snow, an odd reminder that life continued even amid the hardships. A lone horse trotted by, its hooves muffled in the deep white, the breath from its nostrils rising in delicate clouds that vanished quickly into the gray morning. Mary whispered, "Do you think it will snow again tonight, Mom?" Her voice was small, almost timid, as though the question carried a weight beyond her years. Eliza adjusted the shawl around her daughter's shoulders and pressed a kiss to the top of her hair. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but even if it does, we'll manage, love. We always do." She tried to believe her own words as much as she hoped they would comfort her children. They reached the door of their tenement, the steps partially buried in snow. Eliza's fingers were numb as she turned the handle, the cold metal biting into her skin. Inside, the familiar sense of damp wool and stale air wrapped around them like a faded blanket. She laid the bread on the table and removed the children's boots, rubbing their toes and heels to revive circulation. Outside, the wind continued to howl, rattling the window panes. But within the room they huddled together, warm at least in body, if not entirely in spirit. The day passed slowly. The light in the attic room, pale and weak, filtering through frost-covered glass that distorted the shapes outside. Eliza sat by the window, watching the snow shimmer in uneven patterns as the wind shifted it into drifts against the tenement walls. Mary and Thomas played quietly beneath the quilt, making tiny figures with their fingers in the soft breadcrumbs they had left. Their whispered giggles barely audible above the moan of the wind outside. Eliza's hands rested on the rough wood of the table, her fingers tracing the worn grain as she considered what the coming days might bring. The coins beneath the floorboard had dwindled further in the morning, barely enough for another loaf or a small lump of coal. Hunger was a shadow hovering in the corners of the room, subtle yet insistent, pressing against her chest with each breath. Outside, the city's noises were muffled by the thick blanket of snow. A cart rattled somewhere far off, but it sounded distant, dreamlike, as though coming from another place entirely. Occasionally, a crow's sharp caw cut through the stillness, startling Mary into a quiet giggle. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, a reminder that some homes were warmer than theirs, though the scent of burning wood seemed almost taunting against the cold air that seeped in beneath the door. Eliza decided to prepare what little she had for the evening. She broke the remaining bread into small pieces, softening them with a touch of water, and portioned it carefully. Mary and Thomas sat obediently, their eyes wide and trusting, while their mother's mind wandered to stories of warmer times, days when the sun had shone and meals had been plentiful. She allowed herself a small smile as she imagined them walking through fields rather than trudging through snow-laden streets, a memory of light and comfort that soothed her frayed nerves. As the candle guttered low and the wind rattled the window, Eliza pulled the quilt around all three of them, letting the children rest against her shoulders. The cold pressed in from the edges of the room, but within the small circle of warmth, they were safe. Even hunger, for a little while, could not reach them, and as she whispered gentle reassurances into their ears, she felt a fragile hope that the storm would pass and that somehow they would endure another night. Evening arrived like a slow sigh, dimming the pale daylight into a gentle silvery gloom. The candle on the table flickered weakly, its light stretching shadows across the rough plaster walls of the attic room. Outside, the snow had settled into deep drifts, softening the edges of the streets and muffling the usual sounds of the city. Occasionally, a distant carriage wheel groaned, or a child's laugh, sharp with cold, floated from a neighboring alley. Eliza wrapped the children tightly in the quilt, feeling the stiffness in their little bodies from the long day spent in the cold. Mary leaned against her chest, murmuring softly about the snow outside. while Thomas's small hand clutched her sleeve as though it were a lifeline. She could feel the warmth of their bodies, faint but steady, a reminder that even amid hardship, life persisted. The air in the room smelled faintly of cold dust and damp wool, mixed with the warmth of recently eaten bread. Eliza reached over to the stove, now empty, and traced the cold iron with her fingers, wishing for just a spark of warmth. The wind outside rattled the window pane, sending tiny shards of frost spiraling onto the sill. Each patter sounded sharp against the hush of the room, yet somehow comforting, a steady rhythm that accompanied the quiet breathing of her children. She whispered stories of summers long past, of meadows where wildflowers grew, and rivers that glimmered in the sun. The children's eyes grew heavy, lulled by both the warmth of her embrace and the softness of her voice. Each word, slow and deliberate, painted images that felt far removed from the icy streets of London, a gentle escape into a world where hunger was not constant and the cold did not bite so relentlessly. Outside, a crow hopped along a snow-dusted fence, its black feathers striking against the muted landscape. A cat prowled a nearby rooftop, careful in its stealth, tail flicking as it navigated the icy surface. The city seemed both still and alive, each creature finding its own way to survive the deepening cold. Eliza inhaled slowly, letting the quiet settle around her, and felt a fragile peace. Within the walls of their small room, they had warmth, shelter, and one another, a small, shining victory against the merciless winter. Night deepened gradually, drawing a soft, muted veil over the city. The snow outside had thickened into a gentle, endless white, pressing against the tenement walls and drifting in lazy swirls where the wind found gaps. The lamp across the street flickered in rhythm with the occasional gust, casting a warm but wavering light onto the icy cobblestones below. In the quiet, distant church, bells tolled slowly, their sound softened by the snow-laden air. Eliza tucked the children more securely beneath the quilt, smoothing their hair back from flushed cheeks. The fabric smelled faintly of bread, damp wool, and her own worn shawl, a mixture of life, endurance, and comfort. She listened to the wind's low hum as it rattled the panes, imagining it carrying whispers of other families huddled in their attics, kitchens, and alleyways, each one enduring in its own fragile way. A soft scratching at the window startled Mary, and she peeked out with wide eyes. A small bird had perched briefly on the sill, its feathers fluffed against the cold, before fluttering away into the night. The sight brought a quiet smile to Eliza's lips. Even in this harsh winter, life persisted in the smallest forms, daring to exist in the frost. Eliza's hands worked slowly, folding the remaining bread carefully into tiny portions, imagining that it might stretch through the next day. She whispered to the children about summers they had yet to see, about gardens hidden behind the city walls, where flowers danced in the sun. Each word was soft, deliberate, a gentle lull against the pressing cold and hunger. The wind outside rose and fell like the breathing of the city itself, Somewhere in the distance, the muffled sound of a horse's hooves echoed against the frozen streets, and the faint cry of a child floated from another building. The world felt vast and quiet, yet within the small attic, warmth lingered. Wrapped in the quilt, the children's breathing slow and steady, Eliza allowed herself a rare moment of relief. In that fragile cocoon of light and warmth, they were safe, if only for tonight. The wind's moan softened as midnight approached, leaving only a gentle whisper across the rooftops and the soft creak of the tenement settling under the weight of snow. Outside, the city seemed frozen in suspended silence, every street and alley coated in a thin glaze of frost that shimmered faintly in the weak light of the street lamps. Icicles hung from gutters like delicate crystal spears, catching the dim glow and scattering it into tiny fragments across the walls and windows. Inside the attic, Eliza adjusted the quilt around Mary and Thomas once more, pressing them close so their small bodies radiated warmth. The room smelled faintly of coal dust, damp wool, and the remnants of the morning bread. Her own breath fogged the air as she exhaled slowly, a reminder of the chill that lingered even in the small circle of warmth they shared. The children murmured in their sleep, soft sighs and whispers that made Eliza's heart ache with both tenderness and worry. Every sound outside, the distant clatter of a horse, the low cry of a stray cat, the faint echo of footsteps in the alley, felt magnified in the quiet, each one a subtle reminder of the world beyond their fragile sanctuary. Eliza's gaze drifted to the frost-patterned window, tracing the delicate lines that had formed overnight. Each design was unique, shimmering like a tiny frozen forest, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to imagine a place far from hardship, green meadows beneath golden sunlight, laughter carried on the breeze, and warmth abundant enough to chase away fear. Her fingers brushed the small tin beneath the floorboard, where a few coins remained. The weight of them was both a comfort and a reminder of scarcity. She counted them silently, imagining how each could be stretched, how each might shield her children from the cold a little longer. The thought brought both hope and the quiet ache of responsibility. Eliza stirred beneath the quilt, careful not to wake Mary and Thomas too abruptly. Their small bodies were curled close, pink cheeked from the lingering warmth of the night. She rose slowly, the floorboards cold beneath her bare feet, and moved to the window. Frost patterns had grown overnight, delicate lacework that twisted across the glass, each design more intricate than the last. She traced them with a finger, feeling the bite of ice through her glove, and watched as the first pedestrians navigated the slippery streets, each step deliberate and cautious. Mary's soft murmur broke the quiet. "Mom, it's so bright outside." Her voice was thick with sleep, eyes half closed. Thomas yawned beside her, tugging the quilt closer to his chin. Eliza smiled faintly, smoothing her daughter's hair back. "Yes, love, it is. But the snow makes it hard to walk. You'll need to be careful today." They shared a small breakfast, pieces of the last loaf softened with water and eaten slowly, each bite a delicate comfort against the chill. The warmth of the bread in their hands seemed almost miraculous, a tiny shield against the long hours ahead. Outside, the faint clatter of a horse's hooves echoed down a distant street, and the soft cawing of a crow broke the silence intermittently, a reminder that life continued beyond their attic walls. Eliza pulled her shawl around her once more and gathered her children close. The streets would be treacherous with the fresh snow, but they had each other, and as she led them down the narrow stairwell, the city seemed both vast and intimate, its frozen expanse a landscape of challenges, yet also small pockets of warmth, glowing lamps, glowing windows, and the faint promise that survival was possible, even in the harshest of winters. The streets had taken on a crystalline quality as Eliza and her children ventured out, each step through the snow, creating a soft, crunching echo that seemed to linger longer than it should in the still morning air. The wind had settled into a cold, steady hum, brushing against their faces with a sharp, biting insistence. Each gust carried a faint scent of cold smoke, damp stone, and the faint sweetness of chestnuts from a vendor, braving the morning chill. Mary clutched her mother's shawl tighter, her small hands trembling despite the layers of clothing wrapped around her. Thomas trailed close, his scarf tugged high to cover his chapped lips, and every few steps he paused to stamp his feet in the snow, trying to keep the blood flowing through numb toes. Eliza kept a careful watch, navigating around icy patches and uneven drifts, silently counting her steps and keeping a mental map of the safest path home. They passed a small group of boys engaged in a delicate balance of mischief and survival, tossing snowballs that broke apart against the frozen ground instead of each other. Laughter rang out, thin and brittle, momentarily piercing the cold morning with a note of warmth, but the sound faded quickly as the children scurried in different directions, retreating into alleyways and doorways where the frost had yet to settle thickly. Eliza's eyes drifted toward the rooftops, noting the weight of snow piled unevenly, some tiles threatening to give way beneath the silent pressure. Chimneys coughed smoke, twisting in spirals into the gray sky. A crow hopped along the ledge of a nearby building, its glossy black feathers stark against the white snow, and with each hop, the sound of tiny claws against the frozen ledge echoed faintly through the empty street. The market lay ahead, softened by the thick layer of snow, and almost eerily still. The vendors were beginning to set out their meager wares, each one shivering as they arranged the fragile goods on tables dusted with frost. The smell of roasting bread drifted lazily across the square, mingling with coal and wood smoke. Eliza allowed herself a small exhale of relief. The bread might be enough today, the warmth enough for a few hours, and the promise of life, even fragile and precarious, still lingered in the snowy streets. The market was a quiet flurry of activity, softened by the deep layer of snow that clung stubbornly to every surface. Wooden stalls groaned under the weight, and the canvas coverings were streaked with frost, each fold glittering with tiny crystals. The scent of coal smoke mingled with the faint aroma of roasting chestnuts, and somewhere beneath it all, the subtle tang of fish and salted meat lingered in the cold air. Eliza guided Mary and Thomas carefully through the stalls, their boots crunching softly in the snow. The baker's table was already set with a small heap of rolls, each one pale, cracked, and warm enough to release a gentle waft of steam when touched. Eliza's fingers itched to take them all, but she knew the coins in her pocket would only stretch so far. The children's eyes followed her movements closely, the silent understanding of their shared need evident in their small, tentative expressions. A coal vendor, bundled in layers of ragged wool, nodded briefly as Eliza passed. The familiarity was comforting. They were strangers, yet bound by the same struggle, the same endurance against the harsh winter. Mary reached up to peek at the bread, and Thomas tugged at his mother's coat, prompting a small, careful smile from Eliza. She handed over her coins slowly, each one a tiny promise, and received in return a modest portion of bread, soft in the center, crusted at the edges enough to fill small stomachs, but not the fear in her heart. The snow around them fell lightly, catching on scarves and hats, dusting hair with white flecks that melted instantly. A faint bird call came from somewhere above. A crow, perhaps, its note sharp and solitary in the vast whiteness. Beyond the market, the streets stretched into pale, indistinct alleys, the wind moving the snow in lazy, curling patterns that blurred footprints almost as soon as they were made. Eliza tucked the bread carefully into her shawl and pulled the children close. The warmth of their bodies was a fragile shield against the cold that seeped into every corner of the city. As they turned toward home, she let herself notice briefly the beauty of the world around her, the glitter of frost on railings, the soft drifting of snow, the faint, persistent smoke rising from chimneys, an enduring reminder that even in the harshest winters, life carried on, delicate yet unyielding. The walk home was quieter than the journey to the market, the snow absorbing sound until even footsteps seemed hushed, swallowed by the icy blanket covering the streets. Each drift required careful navigation. A single misstep could send small bodies tumbling into the frozen powder. Eliza's hands gripped the children tightly beneath her shawl, their warmth a small shield against the relentless chill that pressed in from all sides. The faint scent of smoke from distant chimneys lingered in the air, mingling with the crisp tang of snow. Occasionally, a stray cat darted across the path, its fur dusted with white, and the soft sound of its paws on the crusted snow seemed impossibly gentle in the quiet morning. A crow wheeled overhead, its wings black against the pale sky, cawing sharply before disappearing behind a roofline. Mary whispered, "Will we be warm when we get home, Mom?" Her voice carried a hint of worry, though she tried to mask it behind the curiosity of a child noticing the drifting snowflakes. Eliza squeezed her hand gently. "We'll be warm enough, love. We'll be together, and that will make us strong." She spoke not only to reassure Mary, but to steady her own thoughts, reminding herself that hope could be found even in the harshest cold. The streets, lined with snow draped buildings, seemed to stretch endlessly, yet familiar landmarks guided them: the crooked sign of the tailor's shop, the narrow archway that led to their alley, and the faint glow of a lamp outside their tenement. Each marker offered a small comfort, a reminder that amidst the vast winter landscape, home awaited with its fragile promise of warmth. As they approached the door, a soft wind whipped snow against their faces, carrying the faintest aroma of roasting chestnuts from a vendor who had set up in a sheltered corner. Eliza inhaled deeply, letting the smell fill her senses and momentarily lift the chill from her spirit. Inside the room would be dim and cold, but within it lay the warmth of family, the simple enduring glow of survival. And with each careful step through the drifts, she felt a quiet, steady confidence. They would endure, one day at a time, one small act of courage and hope at a time. Inside the tenement, the attic room felt both familiar and fragile, a small sanctuary against the vastness of the snowbound city. The window panes were thick with frost, casting muted patterns across the floor where the candlelight struggled to reach. The air smelled faintly of damp wool, cold smoke, and the lingering aroma of the morning bread, a subtle reminder of sustenance amid scarcity. Eliza helped Mary and Thomas remove their boots, rubbing their cold feet until a faint warmth returned. The children's small hands were stiff from the journey, and their cheeks glowed bright against the dim room. Outside, a solitary crow landed on the window sill, its black feathers sleek against the white frost, then abruptly took flight. It reminded her that life continued beyond their fragile walls, that the city, though harsh, remained alive. The wind rattled the roof, lifting tiny shards of frost from the eaves, and she watched them drift down like powdered diamonds before settling on the floorboards. She reached into the small tin beneath the floorboard, counting the remaining coins with meticulous care. Each one was a decision, a choice between warmth, food, or some small comfort for the children. The weight of responsibility pressed gently on her chest. Yet within it also lay the quiet pride of endurance. They had survived the morning. They had found sustenance, and they had each other. Outside, the snow shimmered faintly in the weak daylight, and the city's noises were muted beneath the thick blanket. Inside the room was small, but within it flickered the warmth of life and persistence. Eliza drew the quilt closer around the children, smoothing their hair, whispering gentle reassurances, and allowing herself to feel a fragile hope that even in the harshest of winters, safety and warmth could be found in the smallest, most enduring comforts. As the afternoon waned, the light in the attic room softened into a gentle silvery hue, filtered through the frost-crusted window. Shadows stretched across the floorboards, dancing lightly as the candle flickered in the drafty space. The children lay beneath the quilt, their small bodies tucked close, eyes half closed, lulled by the rhythm of the wind outside and the steady warmth of their mother's embrace. Eliza moved quietly around the room, her movements careful so as not to disturb the fragile peace. She checked the small loaf of bread she had set aside, breaking a few crumbs to soften for the children later. The aroma, faint but comforting, mingled with the subtle smell of cold dust and damp wool, creating a sensory cocoon that reminded them of life, of home, and of endurance. Through the frost-laced window, the city appeared serene yet stark. Snow-covered rooftops glimmered faintly, chimneys releasing lazy spirals of smoke into the pale sky. In the streets below, a lone horse trotted carefully through the drifts, its breath rising in misty clouds that dissipated quickly into the cold air. Somewhere, a distant bell tolled, a quiet marker of passing time, steady and reassuring. Mary murmured softly in her sleep, a half-formed sentence about snow and warmth. Thomas shifted beside her, drawing the quilt higher over his small shoulders. Eliza stroked their hair gently, letting her fingers trace the fine strands, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the delicate bond of family that kept her grounded amid hardship. Outside, the wind whispered along the eaves, teasing loose snow into delicate spirals that drifted down like tiny feathers. Eliza allowed herself a moment to watch them, appreciating their fragile beauty, a reminder that even in winter's severity, there were tiny miracles of life and persistence. She settled back beside her children, wrapping them tightly and feeling the slow, comforting rise and fall of their breathing. In that quiet, frost-tinged room, hope endured, soft, fragile, but unmistakably alive. As evening crept over the city, the pale light of day melted into a soft, muted gray. The snow outside sparkled faintly where the last rays of sun lingered on rooftops and window sills, and the streets below were quiet, muffled by the heavy blanket of frost. Inside the attic, the room seemed smaller and cozier, the shadows stretching long across the rough floorboards, weaving a tapestry of light and dark that moved with the flicker of the candle. Eliza moved slowly, her movements deliberate and soothing, bending to check on Mary and Thomas. Their small bodies were curled together beneath the quilt, warm and still for the moment. The children's breath rose in tiny clouds, visible in the chilly air near the window. She gently adjusted the quilt, tucking it around their shoulders, smoothing stray hairs from their faces, and murmuring soft reassurances. The air smelled faintly of cold dust, bread, and damp wool, mingling in a comforting, familiar way. Outside, the wind stirred once more, rattling the roof and tossing the snow into lazy spirals that clung to the eaves and corners. Eliza could hear the distant echo of a horse's hooves and the faint caw of a crow somewhere high above the city. Each sound was a subtle reminder that the world beyond their walls was alive, moving, and enduring, just as they were. She opened the small tin beneath the floorboard, counting the remaining coins with careful fingers. The weight of them was both a reassurance and a burden, a reminder that each choice mattered: fuel or food, warmth or sustenance. Yet, despite the scarcity, there was a quiet pride in her endurance. She had faced the morning and afternoon storms, had navigated the frozen streets, and had returned with her children, safe and fed. As darkness deepened, she allowed herself a moment of stillness, watching the delicate frost patterns on the window, listening to the soft whisper of the wind, and feeling the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of her children's breathing. In this quiet, fragile cocoon, she felt a thread of hope that though the winter pressed heavily, they would endure one cold day at a time, surrounded by warmth, care, and each other. Night had settled fully over the city, turning the snow-covered streets into a soft, silver expanse. The glow of distant lamps reflected off the icy surfaces, creating faint halos that shimmered in the still air. In the attic, the candle burned low, flickering shadows across the walls and ceiling, making the room feel both intimate and alive with gentle movement. Eliza adjusted the quilt around Mary and Thomas once more, feeling the warmth of their small bodies radiating through the thick wool. Their faces were peaceful in sleep, cheeks flushed from the day's cold and the brief comfort of morning bread. She pressed a light kiss to each forehead, inhaling the faint scent of damp wool, bread, and the subtle tang of cold dust that clung to their clothes and hair. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving a hushed stillness in the city. The snow glimmered under the faint glow of gas lamps, and the distant toll of a church bell marked the passing of time with soft resonance. Somewhere far off, the muffled bark of a dog echoed faintly, and the delicate clatter of hooves on cobblestones reminded her that life persisted even in the deepest winter. Eliza's thoughts drifted to the coming days, to the coal that would need to be bought, and the bread that would need stretching. But she let herself linger on the present moment, the safety of her children, the fragile warmth of the room, and the quiet beauty of the winter night. She moved to the window briefly, brushing a fingertip over the frost patterns, tracing their delicate lacework as the cold pressed gently through the glass. Settling back beside the children, she smoothed the quilt once more, letting her hands linger on their small shoulders. The room was quiet, the wind soft and rhythmic outside, and for a while the fear and worry that accompanied winter seemed to dissolve. In the hush of the night, wrapped in the simple, enduring warmth of family and home, Eliza allowed herself to believe that even in the harshest cold, moments of peace and hope could be found, soft, delicate, and unwavering. The night deepened, and the city outside lay blanketed in an unbroken sheet of snow, quiet except for the occasional whisper of wind through narrow alleys. Each rooftop glistened with frost, and the gas lamps along the streets cast soft golden pools onto the icy cobblestones. The world seemed paused, suspended in a fragile balance between cold and light, silence and movement. Inside the attic, the candle's glow flickered softly across walls that were rough and worn, highlighting the subtle textures of the plaster and the faint scratches left by long years of life. Mary and Thomas slept soundly, huddled close under the quilt, their small hands curled together in a quiet display of trust and comfort. Eliza adjusted the quilt again, tucking them securely and smoothing the folds, each motion slow and deliberate, as if by doing so she could push the cold further away. The smell of coal lingered faintly from earlier in the day, mingling with the warmth of the breadcrumbs scattered from their morning meal. Eliza inhaled deeply, savoring the small comfort of these familiar scents, allowing them to settle her mind even as the wind rattled against the window. Beyond the glass, snow swirled in lazy, swirling eddies, catching the lamp glow like tiny, frozen fireflies suspended in the air. A distant church bell tolled its deep, mellow notes, muffled by the blanket of snow. Somewhere down the street, the soft crunch of a solitary pedestrian's boots on fresh snow echoed faintly, then faded. The city felt vast, yet intimate, alive with quiet persistence, and Eliza drew a slow breath, letting the calm of the scene wash over her. She ran her hands gently over the children's shoulders once more, feeling their warmth and the steady rhythm of their breathing. In that fragile candle-lit cocoon, she let herself believe that despite the winter's cruelty, there was resilience, there was hope, and there was enduring love. And with that thought, she allowed herself to sit in quiet contentment, watching the soft dance of frost and light, letting the hush of the snowy night soothe her weary mind. The deep hush of midnight settled fully over the city, broken only by the soft sighing of the wind as it stirred the snow into drifting patterns along the streets below. Roofs glimmered faintly under the weak light of distant gas lamps, and icicles clung stubbornly to gutters, catching whatever light they could and scattering it into tiny, fleeting prisms. The world seemed almost suspended, fragile and still, holding its breath beneath the frozen blanket of winter. In the attic, the candle's flame flickered weakly, casting warm amber light across the worn floorboards and rough plaster walls. Mary and Thomas lay beneath the quilt, their small bodies curled together, their breaths slow and even. The faint scent of cold smoke and damp wool lingered, mingling with the comforting aroma of softened breadcrumbs, the tiny remnants of sustenance that had brought them warmth throughout the day. Eliza shifted quietly to the window, brushing a fingertip over the frost patterns that decorated the glass in intricate crystalline lacework. Outside, the snow swirled gently, forming delicate spirals that caught the dim light and seemed almost alive, dancing slowly in the cold, still air. She imagined the tiny flurries as a soft, protective veil that shielded them from the harshness of the city beyond, a quiet magic that allowed for a moment of peace. The wind hummed faintly, threading through narrow alleys and around chimney tops, and somewhere in the distance, The faint sound of hooves on cobblestones marked a solitary traveler moving cautiously through the snow. The city, harsh and unyielding by day, now seemed almost gentle, the white blanket softening its edges, hiding the cracks and hardships for just a little while. Eliza knelt beside the children, smoothing their hair and adjusting the quilt so that it covered them completely. She whispered soft reassurances, stories of brighter days, of warmth and laughter, letting her voice weave a gentle cocoon around them. In that quiet candlelight room, the winter outside seemed distant, its bite softened by the warmth of family, hope, and enduring care, a fragile yet unbroken promise that they could survive one night at a time. The night deepened further, and the snow outside seemed to shimmer faintly, reflecting the pale light of the moon, though mostly hidden behind a veil of clouds. Each drift along the streets appeared sculpted, smooth, and untouched, like a fragile layer of sugar spread across the city. The wind was gentle now, no longer sharp and biting, whispering softly through the alleyways, threading around chimneys, and lifting delicate spirals of frost into the still air. Inside the attic, the room felt almost magical in its quiet intimacy. The candle flickered, casting long wavering shadows that danced across the walls, playing over the worn floorboards and the rough plaster that had held generations. Mary and Thomas slept soundly, their small forms pressed close beneath the quilt, tiny hands clasped together, as if for extra warmth and courage. The faint scent of cold smoke and damp wool lingered in the air, intertwined with the comforting aroma of the bread they had shared earlier, soft and muted now. Eliza moved slowly to the window, her breath fogging the cold glass as she peered out at the muted city below. The rooftops glimmered faintly, and icicles hung like crystalline daggers, catching the soft moonlight that managed to pierce the clouds. A solitary crow hopped along a distant rooftop, its black feathers stark against the snow, then took flight, wings cutting a soft arc through the cold air. She returned to the children, smoothing stray strands of hair from their flushed cheeks and adjusting the quilt to cover their shoulders fully. Her hands lingered for a moment, feeling their warmth, feeling the steady rhythm of their breathing. Outside, the city's hush seemed to seep into the room, a calm that allowed her to imagine a day when snow was merely a gentle presence, not a relentless adversary. With the children safe, their bodies warm, and their breaths slow and even, Eliza settled herself beside them. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the hush of the snowy night wash over her. In that fragile cocoon of light, warmth, and familial love, hope persisted, quiet but unwavering, and for a few precious moments, the harsh winter outside felt distant, softened by the enduring comfort of home and the gentle presence of life within. The first stirrings of pre-dawn light filtered faintly through the frost-covered window, painting the room in soft shades of silver and pale blue. The snow outside lay thick and undisturbed, drifts shaped by the gentle currents of wind that whispered across the city's rooftops. Chimneys exhaled thin plumes of smoke that curled lazily into the sky, and the distant clatter of a cart on icy streets hinted that life persisted quietly beyond the tenement walls. Eliza rose carefully, mindful of the sleeping children beneath the quilt. She wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders, the fabric stiff from the cold, and crossed the floorboards to the small stove. It was empty as usual, but she tapped it lightly, imagining the warmth it might one day hold. The smell of lingering cold dust mingled with the faint aroma of bread, comforting in its familiarity, a reminder that even in scarcity, life had its subtle pleasures. Mary stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep about snowflakes and warmth, and Thomas shifted, drawing the quilt closer. Eliza bent to smooth their hair, pressing a gentle kiss to their foreheads. Outside, the wind rose momentarily, rattling the window panes with soft insistence, and tiny crystals of frost slid down the glass, catching the dim light in a glimmering cascade. Through the pale morning haze, she could make out shapes moving along the streets, early risers wrapped in thick coats, a lone horse navigating carefully through the snow, the faint silhouette of a boy carrying a small bundle of coal. Life continued, persistent and quiet, like a heartbeat beneath the stillness. Eliza allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Despite the harshness of winter, the city's rhythm endured, and they were still part of it. Returning to the children, she settled beside them, letting her hands linger on their small shoulders, feeling their warmth, the soft rise and fall of their breathing, the gentle weight of the quilt around them, and the muted shimmer of frost outside created a fragile sanctuary. In that calm, silver-lit morning, she allowed herself to breathe fully, letting the quiet promise of another day wrap around them. And for a moment, winter's severity felt softened by the enduring warmth of family and home. The morning unfolded slowly, the pale winter light filtering through the frost-covered windows and painting soft patterns on the floorboards. Outside, the snow glimmered faintly, untouched and serene, like powdered sugar strewn across the city. The wind carried only a whisper, now lifting tiny flurries that twirled lazily in the still air, while the distant hum of life, horse hooves, the soft scrape of a cart, reminded Eliza that the city continued to breathe, even under the heavy cloak of winter. Eliza adjusted the quilt around the children, noticing how their small bodies pressed close together, radiating warmth into the cold room. Their cheeks were pink with sleep and the lingering chill. Their tiny hands curled gently, one clasped over the other, as if for comfort. She leaned down to smooth Mary's hair and pressed a soft kiss to Thomas's brow. The soft scent of their hair mingled with the faint aroma of cold dust and damp wool, grounding her in the quiet intimacy of their shared space. The bread they had gathered from the market still sat in small portions, its warmth now cooled, but its texture softened with careful care. Eliza broke off a small piece for each child, dipping it briefly in a little water to make it easier to chew. The subtle taste was modest, almost plain, yet it brought comfort, a reminder that even scarcity could sustain and protect in its own quiet way. Through the window, She watched the snow-laden streets. Chimneys released lazy curls of smoke, and the rooftops shimmered under the faint light. The drifts sculpted by the night's wind into soft, delicate forms. Somewhere in the distance, a solitary crow hopped along the eaves, its black feathers stark against the pristine white, and the soft clatter of a lone footstep echoed faintly in the stillness. Eliza settled beside the children, smoothing the quilt over their shoulders and letting her fingers linger on their warm, soft skin. In the hush of the morning, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the fragile beauty of life persisting against the cold. The world outside was harsh, relentless, yet within this small room, warmth, love, and endurance wrapped around them like a shield, a quiet promise that they could face another day together. The snow outside began to soften in the gentle morning light, each flake sparkling faintly before settling into the already thick blanket covering the streets. Chimneys exhaled plumes of smoke that curled lazily toward the pale sky, and distant bells tolled with a soft resonance, marking the steady passage of time. The city, harsh and unyielding during the day, now seemed peaceful under winter's soft veil. Inside the attic, Eliza moved carefully, mindful of the children still nestled beneath the quilt. Mary's eyelashes fluttered briefly, and Thomas yawned, drawing the quilt closer around his shoulders. Their small hands remained entwined, tiny symbols of trust and togetherness. Eliza smoothed the quilt, adjusting it so their warmth radiated evenly, and pressed a gentle kiss to each of their foreheads. The air smelled faintly of cold dust, lingering bread, and damp wool. Each scent carried a memory of the day before, the walk through the snow-covered streets, the quiet market, and the small triumph of bringing sustenance home. Even amidst scarcity, these simple reminders of life provided a sense of continuity and calm. Eliza glanced toward the frost-covered window, where delicate, crystalline patterns caught the morning light. Tiny spirals of frost slid slowly down the glass, like nature's gentle clock marking time in its own rhythm. She imagined the streets below, the quiet movement of early risers navigating carefully over the snow, and the soft footsteps of animals, cats, birds, and dogs alike, leaving fleeting impressions before vanishing. Returning to the children, she settled beside them and traced slow, soothing patterns over their shoulders, letting the warmth of her hands mingle with their own. Outside, the wind whispered softly, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and chestnuts. In the stillness of the attic, wrapped in quilt and candlelight, Eliza allowed herself to breathe fully. Despite the harsh winter outside, within this small cocoon, warmth, hope, and the enduring comfort of family persisted, steady and gentle like a soft, unbroken rhythm. The sun rose higher, though pale and muted behind thick winter clouds. The streets below glimmered faintly as the snow caught what little light filtered through, and rooftops glistened with frost. The city seemed hushed, every sound softened, as if the blanket of snow had absorbed the usual clamor of horse-drawn carts and market cries. A few early risers moved cautiously through the streets, leaving small, fleeting footprints before the wind erased them almost immediately. Inside the attic, Eliza sat quietly, watching Mary and Thomas shift slightly in their sleep beneath the quilt. Their small bodies radiated warmth, a gentle counterpoint to the chill that lingered in the room. The scent of coal and damp wool mingled with the faint aroma of breadcrumbs, a subtle, comforting reminder of their modest breakfast. Eliza smoothed the quilt over their shoulders and ran her fingers gently through their hair, feeling the steady rhythm of their breathing. Through the frost-laced window, she saw delicate patterns forming as tiny crystals clung to the glass. Snow swirled in lazy spirals along the streets, pushed gently by the wind, and the faint echo of distant bells marked the passage of time. A crow hopped along a rooftop, its black feathers sharp against the soft white landscape, and a dog's faint bark traveled down an empty alley. Even in the midst of winter's quiet severity, life persisted, delicate and resilient. Eliza reached for the small tin beneath the floorboard, checking the few remaining coins. Their weight was a quiet reminder of responsibility, of choices to be made between warmth, food, and other small comforts. Yet alongside that weight was a sense of quiet pride, the knowledge that she had brought her children safely through another night, that they had found sustenance and remained together despite the harsh cold. Settling back beside the children, she pressed her hand gently to their shoulders, feeling the warmth seep into her own cold fingers. Outside, the wind whispered softly, carrying with it hints of coal, snow, and distant smoke. Within this fragile attic, wrapped in quilt and candlelight, hope persisted. The winter might be relentless, but they were not defeated. Here, in this small, warm space, life endured, steady and gentle, as soft and unbroken as the hush of the snow outside. By mid-morning, the pale winter light had grown slightly brighter, though the sun remained hidden behind thick clouds. The snow-covered streets below seemed almost otherworldly, smooth and pristine where no footprints marred their surface, and rough where travelers had passed with careful, deliberate steps. Faint spirals of smoke rose from chimneys, twisting slowly into the gray sky, carrying the subtle warmth of countless fires burning in tiny kitchens across the city. Eliza moved quietly around the attic, her bare feet pressing lightly against the cold, worn floorboards. Mary and Thomas stirred slightly beneath the quilt, murmuring softly in dreams of warmth and play. Eliza smoothed the folds of the blanket over their small shoulders and pressed a kiss to each of their foreheads. The scent of cold dust, damp wool, and faintly sweetened bread clung to the room, comforting in its familiarity, a gentle shield against the icy winter beyond the walls. She paused by the frost-covered window, tracing her fingers along the intricate crystalline patterns that had formed overnight. Tiny spirals and feathers of ice reflected the faint light, sparkling like fragile diamonds. The streets below were quiet, save for the soft crunch of distant footsteps and the faint jingle of a harness as a horse navigated the snow. Life moved slowly, measured and cautiously in the winter hush. yet it moved nonetheless. Eliza returned to the children, settling beside them and letting her hands rest on their small shoulders. She whispered soft, gentle reassurances, stories of warm days in sunlit fields and meadows, of laughter and freedom beyond the cold streets. The words seemed to wrap around the children, weaving a cocoon of comfort and quiet hope within the fragile sanctuary of the attic. Outside, the wind stirred once more, lifting tiny flurries of snow into lazy arcs that sparkled in the muted light. Inside, the warmth of body and heart prevailed, and Eliza allowed herself a moment of stillness, feeling the steady rhythm of her children's breathing, the soft weight of the quilt, and the enduring promise of life even amid the harshest winter. In this small room, wrapped in warmth and love, they had survived another night, and the day ahead, though cold, held the quiet hope of continued endurance. As the day wore on, the light in the attic shifted subtly, casting a soft, diffuse glow through the frost-laced window. The snow outside sparkled faintly, reflecting what little light the winter sky offered, and the streets below were quiet, their surfaces smooth, except for the fleeting traces of a few careful travelers. Chimneys released gentle plumes of smoke, twisting lazily upward before dissolving into the gray sky. Eliza moved about the room with calm deliberation, mindful of the quiet slumber of Mary and Thomas beneath the quilt, their small bodies pressed close together, radiating warmth into the cold room. She smoothed the folds of the blanket, brushing stray hairs from their cheeks, inhaling the faint scent of damp wool, coal, and lingering breadcrumbs. The subtle aroma of survival and comfort intertwined. Through the window, she observed the muted life of the city. A lone crow hopped along a snow-dusted rooftop, black feathers vivid against the white expanse, then took flight in a soft, fluttering arc. The distant clatter of a cart's wheels over frozen cobblestones echoed faintly, and a dog padded cautiously along a narrow alley. Even amid winter's harshness, life persisted in careful, measured ways. Eliza returned to the small tin beneath the floorboard, feeling the weight of the few remaining coins. Each coin represented choice, responsibility, and protection. The awareness of scarcity pressed softly on her heart, yet it was tempered by quiet pride in having safely brought her children through another morning, nourished and sheltered, and by the knowledge that they still had each other. Settling beside the children, she pressed her hands gently to their shoulders, feeling their warmth seep into her own chilled fingers. Outside, the wind whispered faintly, carrying traces of smoke and snow. Inside, in the quiet candlelight room, warmth, hope, and love wrapped around them like a delicate, unbroken shield. And as the light shifted and softened further, Eliza allowed herself to feel a fragile, enduring peace, the reassurance that, together, they could face the cold, the hunger, and the winter's long, relentless days. The afternoon waned, and the winter light softened to a pale, muted silver that stretched across the attic walls and floorboards. Shadows from the flickering candle grew longer, moving gently with the slight drafts that whispered through the old wooden frame of the window. The snow outside, thick and undisturbed, glimmered faintly the faint footprints of early travelers, now partially covered by a new sprinkling of frost. Eliza adjusted the quilt around Mary and Thomas, who were stirring softly from their light afternoon nap. Their faces, pink from warmth and the cold outside, were relaxed and peaceful. She smoothed Mary's hair and held Thomas's small hand, feeling the delicate pulse of life and the fragile strength that warmth and family provided in these bitter winter days. The scent of cold dust, damp wool, and bread lingering from earlier meals wrapped the room in familiarity and comfort. What challenges do you think Eliza will face as the cold and her resources continue to dwindle? Through the frost covered window, the world appeared quiet and magical. Tiny spirals of snow swirled in the wind's gentle currents, catching the dim light and floating lazily before settling. A crow wheeled in the sky, cawing softly, and the muffled clip-clop of distant hooves echoed faintly across the empty streets. Each sound seemed amplified in the stillness, yet oddly calming, a rhythm of life persisting quietly beneath winter's severity. Eliza traced patterns in the frost on the window, imagining meadows and streams far from the snow-covered city, places warm and safe, filled with laughter and sunlight. She let her mind linger there briefly, savoring the comfort of imagination and memory before turning back to the children who clutched at the quilt as if it were a shield against the cold world outside. She settled back beside them, resting her hands gently on their shoulders. Their warmth seeped into her own chilled fingers, and she felt a quiet sense of hope. Though the winter was unrelenting, the snow heavy, and the city harsh, they had shelter, sustenance, and each other. In the hush of the afternoon, wrapped in quilt and candlelight, the harsh world felt distant, softened by love, care, and the enduring promise of life, persisting even in the coldest months. The light outside began to fade slowly, the pale winter sky deepening into soft shades of gray and lavender. As the day transitioned to evening, snowflakes drifted lazily from the clouds, adding to the thick blanket that already coated the streets. Chimneys released gentle spirals of smoke that mingled with the crisp cold air, carrying the faint scent of coal and wood, a reminder that warmth was possible even in the harshest winter conditions. Inside the attic, the room felt cocooned in gentle stillness. Mary and Thomas stirred slightly beneath the quilt, their small bodies nestled close, radiating warmth. Eliza brushed their hair from their faces and adjusted the folds of the blanket, smoothing the edges so that the warmth surrounded them completely. The air was faintly scented with damp wool and coal dust, mingling with the remnants of softened breadcrumbs, the simple comforts of survival. Again through the frost-crusted window, Eliza watched the delicate patterns forming along the edges of the glass. Tiny crystalline spirals glimmered faintly in the dimming light, catching what little glow filtered through the clouds. Below, the streets were almost silent, save for the soft, distant sound of a horse's hooves on icy cobblestones and the occasional muffled cry of a crow. The city seemed hushed, suspended in a quiet moment between day and night. Eliza returned to the children, settling beside them and letting her hands rest on their shoulders. She whispered softly, telling them stories of warmth, sunshine, and open fields, allowing her words to wrap around them like the quilt, a gentle shield against both cold and fear. The wind outside seemed to echo the rhythm of her voice, curling through the eaves and around the corners of the building, soft and persistent. In the fading light of the attic, the children's breathing grew even and slow. Eliza felt a quiet contentment in the simple, enduring act of being together, safe and warm. Outside, winter continued its relentless dance, but within this small, candlelit room, warmth, love, and hope lingered, delicate, persistent, and unwavering, a soft cocoon against the world's cold edges. The sky darkened further as evening approached, transforming the snow-laden city into a world of soft shadows and muted grays. The rooftops glimmered faintly under the dim light of distant gas lamps, and the streets lay quiet, coated with snow that sparkled faintly like crushed glass. Every footstep that broke the stillness left a fleeting impression, erased almost immediately by drifting flurries carried softly on the evening wind. Inside the attic, the candle flickered gently, casting long, wavering shadows across the rough plaster walls and worn floorboards. Mary and Thomas shifted beneath the quilt, murmuring softly in dreams as their small bodies radiated warmth. Eliza smoothed the quilt once more, adjusting the folds to fully cover their shoulders, and pressed a gentle kiss to each child's forehead. The faint aroma of coal, damp wool, and remnants of bread wrapped the room in a familiar, comforting embrace. Outside, the wind moved in quiet spirals, lifting light snow into lazy arcs that glittered briefly before settling. A distant horse moved cautiously down a side street, its breath rising in misty clouds that mingled with the soft smoke drifting from chimneys. Somewhere, a crow called faintly, its cry muted by the hush of falling snow. Each sound seemed amplified in the stillness, marking the rhythm of a world that continued steadily, even in winter's harsh grasp. Eliza leaned back against the wall, watching the frost patterns on the window as they shifted slightly in the draft. The crystalline shapes reflected the faint lamplight, sparkling like tiny stars caught in ice. She imagined meadows far from the city, sunlight warming the skin, and laughter echoing across open fields. Though those days were distant memories, the thought brought a quiet smile and a gentle comfort to her heart. Settling beside the children, she allowed herself to linger in the warmth of their presence, feeling the steady rhythm of their breathing and the comforting weight of the quilt. Winter's cold pressed against the walls and windows, but within this fragile candlelit attic, love, hope, and quiet endurance persisted. Here life continued, soft, gentle, and resilient, like a slow, steady heartbeat in the hush of the evening. Night deepened fully over the city, and the snow outside glowed faintly in the light of the gas lamps, which cast soft, golden reflections onto the icy streets. The wind had settled into a gentle hum, lifting delicate flakes into spiraling dances before letting them settle quietly onto rooftops and window sills. Even the distant clatter of carts and footsteps seemed muted, softened by the thick blanket of snow that absorbed sound and time alike. Inside the attic, Eliza moved with care, mindful of the sleeping children beneath the quilt, Mary's soft, even breaths, and Thomas's faint murmurs spoke of dreams untouched by the harsh cold outside. Eliza smoothed the quilt over their small shoulders once more, pressing it tightly against them to guard against the chill. The faint scent of cold dust, damp wool, and the lingering aroma of bread wrapped the room in a cocoon of familiarity and safety. Through the frost-covered window, she could see the intricate crystalline patterns forming along the edges of the glass. Each spiral and feather of frost caught the lamplight, creating tiny, fragile rainbows that shimmered softly. The rooftops were dusted with snow, and the occasional curling plume of smoke rose slowly from chimneys, fading into the pale night sky. Somewhere far below, a crow hopped along a ledge, black against the white expanse, before taking flight with soft flaps that echoed faintly in the silence. Eliza returned to the children and rested her hands gently on their shoulders, feeling the warmth radiating into her own cold fingers. She whispered soft stories of sunny fields and warm days, letting her voice create a cocoon of reassurance around them. The wind outside seemed to echo the rhythm of her speech, curling gently through the eaves and settling in quiet eddies along the walls. In the stillness of the night, wrapped in quilt and candlelight, the harshness of winter felt distant. The city's cold persisted beyond the fragile walls, yet inside, warmth, hope, and love endured. Each gentle breath, each soft heartbeat, and each flicker of candlelight formed a quiet, steady rhythm that reminded Eliza of resilience, of life, and of the small, unwavering comforts that kept them safe and together in the frost-laden night. The night deepened further, and the attic room seemed suspended in time, caught between the cold hush of winter outside and the soft, flickering warmth of the candle within. The snow-coated city beyond the window lay quiet, shimmering faintly under the weak glow of gas lamps. Rooftops were layered in sparkling frost, and every drift seemed sculpted by the whispering wind into gentle rounded forms. Eliza sat quietly beside the children, tracing her fingers lightly over the quilt that enveloped their small bodies. Mary stirred slightly, murmuring a soft syllable in sleep, and Thomas pressed closer to his mother, seeking warmth and security. The faint scent of cold, damp wool and the remnants of bread wrapped the room in familiarity, comforting against the relentless winter outside. Through the frost-laced window, delicate crystalline patterns caught the dim lamplight from the street below, sparkling like tiny stars frozen in place. A faint call reached her ears from a distant crow, and the soft echo of hooves on icy cobblestones drifted upward from a quiet alley. Even amidst winter's severity, the city's pulse continued in hushed, measured beats. Eliza's hands lingered on the children's shoulders, letting the warmth flow gently between them. She whispered stories of bright sunlit meadows, of laughter carried by warm breezes, of days when the cold was only a memory, each word wrapped around the children like the quilt itself, a protective layer of comfort and hope. The wind sighed softly against the walls, moving through tiny cracks and around the eaves, and for a moment the chill outside felt almost distant in the stillness of the attic, bathed in candlelight. The warmth of family, the soft rhythm of breath, and the quiet pulse of life persisted. The harsh winter beyond could not penetrate the fragile sanctuary they had carved, a small room of enduring love, calm, and gentle hope, where survival and comfort intertwined seamlessly in the hush of night. The attic room seemed to grow even quieter as midnight approached its deepest hour. Outside, the snow lay smooth and unbroken, its pale surface reflecting the faint glow of distant gas lamps. The wind whispered through the city streets in slow, gentle swirls, lifting tiny flakes that danced lazily before settling onto rooftops and windowsills. Each movement of snow seemed deliberate and slow, like the world itself was breathing softly beneath winter's hush. Eliza moved carefully beside the sleeping children, mindful of their fragile rest. Mary and Thomas nestled beneath the quilt, small hands intertwined, cheeks flushed with warmth. She smoothed the blanket over their shoulders and pressed a gentle kiss to each forehead, inhaling the familiar scent of damp wool, cold dust, and faint remnants of bread. Each scent anchored her to the present, grounding her in the quiet intimacy of their shared space. Through the frost-covered window, Eliza admired the intricate, crystalline patterns forming along the edges of the glass. Each delicate spiral and feather of frost shimmered faintly, catching the dim lamplight in subtle flashes. A distant crow called once, before disappearing behind a roof line, and the soft clatter of a solitary horse's hooves echoed faintly along the snow-dusted streets. The city, though harsh by day, now seemed softened and almost magical beneath winter's gentle touch. Eliza returned to the children, placing her hands lightly on their small shoulders. She whispered soft reassurances, weaving gentle tales of warmth, sunlit fields, and the quiet joy of simpler days. The wind outside seemed to mimic the rhythm of her words, curling gently around the walls and eaves, wrapping the room in a protective hush. In the fragile light of the attic, the warmth of body and heart persisted, though winter's cold pressed relentlessly against the city beyond. Inside, love, hope, and resilience endured. Each slow breath, each heartbeat, and each flicker of candlelight formed a steady rhythm, a gentle reminder that even in the harshest winter nights, safety, comfort, and family could hold strong, providing a sanctuary of calm and enduring care. The night deepened further, and the quiet outside was profound, broken only by the occasional distant sound, muffled bark, the soft clatter of hooves on cobblestones, or the faint caw of a crow. Snowflakes drifted in delicate spirals, settling silently on rooftops and streets, forming a pristine, soft layer that reflected the dim glow of street lamps in tiny, fleeting sparkles. Inside the attic, the candlelight flickered warmly, casting elongated shadows across the rough plaster walls and worn floorboards. Mary and Thomas lay huddled together beneath the quilt, their small forms radiating comforting warmth into the chilly room. Eliza smoothed the quilt carefully, ensuring it tucked snugly around their shoulders, and pressed a gentle kiss to each child's brow. The faint, comforting scent of coal, damp wool, and the lingering aroma of bread filled the space, creating a cocoon of familiarity and safety. Eliza leaned closer to the frost laced window, tracing delicate patterns with her finger. Tiny crystalline spirals glimmered faintly in the muted light, reflecting soft hints of gold from the distant lamps. The rooftops were draped in snow, and curling plumes of smoke rose slowly from chimneys, fading into the night sky. Below, a single pedestrian moved cautiously along the street, leaving brief impressions that the wind would soon erase. Settling back beside the children, Eliza let her hands rest gently on their shoulders. She whispered soft, slow stories of distant meadows, warm sunlight, and laughter, letting each word settle like a gentle blanket over their imaginations. The wind outside seemed to mimic her calm rhythm, curling through cracks in the window frame and along the eaves, wrapping the room in a soft, protective hush. Within the quiet candlelight attic, warmth, hope, and love endured, impervious to the harsh winter pressing against the fragile walls. Life persisted in small, gentle ways, the slow rise and fall of breath, the comforting weight of the quilt, and the steady flicker of the candle. Together, they were safe, protected, and resilient, cocooned in a delicate sanctuary where winter's severity could not reach the enduring heart of family. The night stretched on, and the attic was wrapped in a deep, soothing quiet. Outside, the snow-covered city was muted and serene, the drifts shimmering faintly in the pale glow of distant lamps. Tiny flurries swirled lazily in the wind, settling softly on rooftops and window sills. The muffled sounds of life, a horse's hooves, a distant cough, or the soft creak of a cart, passed like whispers through the stillness, a gentle reminder that the city continued to breathe beneath winter's weight. Eliza moved quietly around the room, her bare feet brushing lightly against the cold floorboards. Mary and Thomas lay curled together beneath the quilt, their small forms exuding warmth and a delicate sense of safety. She brushed stray strands of hair from their faces, adjusting the blanket with care so that the warmth enveloped them fully. The faint scent of cold dust and damp wool lingered, mingling with the softened aroma of bread from their earlier meal, a comforting, homely presence in the chill of the attic. Through the frost-covered window, Eliza watched tiny crystalline patterns form along the edges of the glass. Each delicate spiral shimmered faintly as it caught the dim lamplight from below. Smoke rose slowly from chimneys, twisting lazily into the cold night air, while a lone crow hopped along a roof before taking flight with soft, fluttering wings. The snow below reflected the subtle light, transforming the city into a quiet, magical landscape, suspended in winter's hush. Returning to the children, Eliza placed her hands gently on their shoulders, letting her warmth mingle with theirs. She whispered slow, gentle stories of green meadows, golden sunlight, and the comfort of home, allowing her voice to weave a cocoon of reassurance around them. Outside, the wind seemed to echo her calm rhythm, curling softly through the eaves and around the fragile edges of the window. In the flickering candlelight, the attic was a sanctuary against the relentless cold outside. Each breath, each heartbeat, and the steady warmth of body and quilt formed a quiet rhythm, a gentle reminder that life persisted even in the harshest winter. Within this fragile sanctuary, love, hope, and resilience endured, cocooning the small family in a soft, unbroken shield of comfort and safety. The night had deepened into a velvet stillness, and the snow outside lay untouched, soft and sparkling under the faint glow of the city's lamps. Chimneys exhaled gentle curls of smoke, carrying the warm scent of wood and coal into the crisp, cold air. The wind whispered softly through the streets, lifting tiny spirals of snow that danced lazily before settling into the quiet drifts below. Inside the attic, the room was a haven of warmth and gentle light. Mary and Thomas slept soundly beneath the quilt, their small forms pressed close together. Eliza ran her hands gently over the quilt, smoothing folds and ensuring the children were fully wrapped in warmth. The familiar scent of cold dust, damp wool, and faint bread lingered in the air, grounding the room in comfort and familiarity. Through the frost-covered window, she observed the intricate crystalline patterns forming along the edges of the glass. Each spiral glimmered softly, catching the dim lamplight from below, like tiny frozen stars suspended in the cold. A distant crow called once before, taking flight, and the muffled clip-clop of a lone horse's hooves echoed faintly along the snow-laden streets. Life, though slow and careful in winter, continued steadily beneath the hush. Eliza whispered gentle stories to the sleeping children, her voice slow and soothing. Tales of golden fields, warm sunlight, and soft rolling hills flowed softly into the room, wrapping them in a blanket of imagination and calm. The wind outside carried her words faintly, curling through the eaves and around the corners of the attic, blending with the natural hush of winter to create a cocoon of quiet. In that candlelight attic, Eliza felt the enduring rhythm of life, steady, soft, and unwavering. The warmth of her children, the soft flicker of light, and the comforting sense of home formed a fragile yet unbroken sanctuary. Outside, winter pressed relentlessly, but inside love, hope, and gentle care held them safe, a delicate shield against the cold, and a reminder that even in the harshest seasons, life and warmth could persist. The attic grew quieter as the night deepened, filled only with the soft, even breaths of Mary and Thomas beneath the quilt. Outside, the snow lay smooth and glimmering, reflecting the faint glow of distant gas lamps. Wisps of smoke rose slowly from chimneys, curling lazily into the pale sky, carrying the gentle scent of coal and wood through the still, cold air. Every sound, footsteps, hooves, a distant crow, was softened and measured by the blanket of snow, creating a serene, almost dreamlike rhythm across the city. Eliza moved carefully around the room, her fingers brushing lightly over the quilt to ensure the children's warmth remained uninterrupted. She inhaled the faint mixture of cold dust, damp wool, and lingering bread, savoring the comforting familiarity of these modest scents. The candle flickered softly, casting long, gentle shadows on the walls and lending a soft, amber glow that made the rough plaster and worn floorboards seem more intimate, more protective. Through the frost-laced window, delicate patterns shimmered faintly in the dim lamplight. Tiny crystalline spirals and feathers formed intricate lacework along the glass, a reminder of winter's artistry, even in its harshest moments. A soft caw from a distant crow, followed by the muted clip-clop of a lone horse on the streets below, punctuated the stillness. Life persisted in careful, measured ways, quietly resisting the cold's relentless weight. Eliza settled beside the children, resting her hands gently on their shoulders. She whispered slow, soothing stories of sunny meadows, warm fires, and laughter carried on gentle breezes. Each word, deliberate and calm, wrapped around the children like the quilt itself, a protective cocoon that softened the harshness of the world outside. In that fragile attic, warmth, hope, and love endured. The slow rhythm of breath, the faint flicker of candlelight, and the soft presence of family created a sanctuary against winter's chill. Though the night was long and the snow pressed heavily against the city, the small candlelit room remained a haven, a reminder that even amid scarcity and cold, life, resilience, and gentle comfort could continue unbroken. The attic was wrapped in deep silence, broken only by the soft, steady breaths of Mary and Thomas beneath the quilt. Outside, the snow lay pristine, reflecting the dim glow of distant street lamps, while gentle spirals of wind lifted light flakes into graceful dances before letting them settle on rooftops and eaves. The muffled sounds of life, hoofbeats, the distant rattle of a cart, a solitary crow, passed faintly through the winter hush, marking the city's slow, deliberate rhythm. Eliza moved carefully beside the children, brushing stray strands of hair from their cheeks and adjusting the quilt to guard their small bodies against the lingering chill. The faint aroma of cold dust and damp wool mingled with the lingering sweetness of breadcrumbs, grounding the attic in comforting familiarity. Each small scent, each soft flicker of the candle made the room feel more intimate, more protective, a fragile cocoon against the relentless winter outside. Through the frost-laced window, delicate crystalline patterns shimmered faintly, catching the dim lamplight from the streets below. Tiny spirals and feathers of ice formed intricate, ephemeral designs, reflecting the muted gold of the lamps and giving the snow a magical, almost otherworldly glow. A distant crow called softly, and the muffled clip-clop of a lone horse's hooves echoed faintly along the icy cobblestones. Life continued carefully, quietly persisting against the cold. Eliza settled beside the children, placing her hands gently on their shoulders and whispering soft, soothing stories, tales of sunny fields, gentle streams, and the warm embrace of home floated through the room. wrapping the children in the gentle rhythm of her voice. The wind outside seemed to echo her calm, curling through the eaves and brushing softly against the window panes. In the quiet, candlelit attic, warmth and love endured, the soft weight of the quilt, the slow rhythm of breath, and the gentle flicker of the candle created a sanctuary from winter's harshness. Outside, the snow pressed on relentlessly, but within these walls, hope, care, and the enduring presence of family formed a delicate, unbroken shield, a quiet reminder that even in the coldest months, life and comfort could persist. The night stretched deeper, and the attic seemed suspended in a tranquil hush. Outside, the snow shimmered faintly under the dim glow of the city's gas lamps, soft and unbroken, save for the occasional tracks of a lone passerby. Chimneys breathed out thin plumes of smoke, mingling with the crisp winter air, carrying the faint scent of burning wood and coal that drifted into the streets below. The gentle whisper of the wind threaded through alleys and rooftops, lifting tiny snowflakes into slow, lazy spirals before they settled again. Inside, Eliza moved quietly, mindful of the sleeping children. Mary and Thomas nestled beneath the quilt, tiny bodies pressed close, radiating warmth that seeped into the chilly room. She smoothed the blanket over their shoulders and pressed a gentle kiss to each forehead. The comforting aroma of coal, damp wool, and softened bread lingered, creating a cocoon of familiarity and quiet reassurance. Through the frost-laced window, delicate crystalline patterns glittered softly, catching the faint lamplight from below. Each intricate spiral and feather of frost seemed like a miniature universe frozen in time. A crow called distantly, wings flapping softly, and the muffled clip-clop of a horse's hooves echoed faintly across the snowy streets. Even in winter's quiet severity, life persisted, subtle and unhurried. Eliza settled beside the children, resting her hands gently on their shoulders. She whispered slow, soothing stories of warm sun, open fields, and laughter carried on gentle breezes. Her words wrapped around them like the quilt itself, a protective layer of calm and comfort against the world's cold edges. In the still candlelit attic, warmth and love persisted. The slow rhythm of breathing, the soft flicker of light, and the gentle presence of family created a sanctuary against winter's harshness. Though the city outside was cold and unyielding, within these walls, hope, endurance, and tenderness endured. A quiet, unbroken rhythm that promised safety and comfort through the long winter night. The night pressed on, and the attic grew ever quieter, filled only with the gentle rhythm of Mary and Thomas's breaths beneath the quilt. Outside, snow lay thick and still, glinting faintly in the soft glow of distant street lamps. Tiny flurries swirled lazily in the wind, settling onto rooftops and window sills with a soft, almost deliberate grace. The occasional distant sound, a crow's call, a horse's cautious step, or the faint creak of a cart, passed like whispers through the calm of winter, marking time slowly and softly. Eliza moved carefully beside the children, brushing away stray hairs from their faces and ensuring the quilt wrapped them snugly. The familiar sense of damp wool, Cold dust and faint remnants of bread filled the room, creating a comforting, grounding atmosphere. Each small detail, the flicker of the candle, the gentle warmth from the children's bodies, the faint creak of the floorboards, wove together to form a sanctuary against the bitter winter outside. Through the frost-covered window, intricate crystalline patterns glimmered faintly in the lamplight. Each delicate spiral and feather of ice seemed alive, catching the eye with tiny, fleeting sparks of light. Smoke rose slowly from chimneys below, curling lazily into the cold night, while the streets lay hushed and soft beneath the snow. Life persisted quietly, measured, delicate, but unstoppable. Eliza rested her hands lightly on the children's shoulders, whispering soft stories of sunlit meadows, warm fires, and laughter carried on gentle winds. Her voice wrapped around them like the quilt itself, a protective layer of calm and reassurance. Outside, the wind seemed to echo her words, curling through eaves and window frames, bringing a sense of continuity between the harsh world beyond and the gentle haven within. In the candlelit attic, warmth, love, the slow rise and fall of breath, the gentle flicker of light, and the steady presence of family formed a quiet rhythm that persisted through the winter night. Outside, snow and cold continued their relentless dominion, but inside life and care remained steadfast, a soft, enduring cocoon of comfort and resilience. The attic was wrapped in stillness, the quiet only broken by the faint whisper of wind outside and the soft, steady breathing of Mary and Thomas beneath the quilt. Snow lay thick over the streets below, shimmering faintly in the pale light of gas lamps, while the occasional curling plume of chimney smoke drifted slowly into the frozen night. Every sound, hoofbeats, distant calls, the scrape of a cart, was softened by the blanket of snow, lending the city an almost dreamlike serenity. Eliza moved gently beside the children, brushing stray hairs from their cheeks and adjusting the quilt so that warmth enveloped them completely. The familiar sense of cold dust, damp wool, and remnants of bread wrapped the room in a comforting embrace, grounding her in the simple, enduring rhythms of their lives. The candle flickered softly, casting shadows that danced along the rough plaster walls and worn floorboards, giving the attic a quiet, almost magical intimacy. Through the frost-laced window, she observed delicate, crystalline patterns forming and shifting subtly with the drafts. Tiny spirals and feathery tendrils of ice shimmered faintly in the dim lamplight, transforming the snow-laden streets into a soft, glittering world. A distant crow called once, wings flapping, and the muffled clip-clop of a horse echoed faintly along a quiet alley. And hope endured. Life persisted carefully, gently, even under winter's harshest touch. Eliza settled beside the children, placing her hands lightly on their shoulders. She whispered slow, soothing stories of sunny fields, flowing streams, and the comforting warmth of home. Her words wrapped around them like the quilt itself, creating a cocoon of calm and security. The wind outside seemed to echo the rhythm of her voice, curling softly through the eaves and settling along the edges of the window panes. In that fragile candle-lit attic, warmth, hope, and love endured. The gentle rise and fall of breath, the flicker of the candlelight, and the soft presence of family created a sanctuary against winter's chill. The snow and cold pressed relentlessly beyond the walls, but inside life and comfort persisted, soft, steady, and unbroken, a delicate reminder that even in the harshest winter nights, safety, resilience, and tender care could prevail. The night deepened further, and the attic seemed to float in a world apart, removed from the frozen streets below. The snow outside shimmered softly under the faint glow of distant lamps, each flake drifting slowly before settling on rooftops and window sills. The muffled sounds of life, a horse's hooves, the occasional call of a crow, or the distant scrape of a cart, traveled faintly through the winter hush, echoing with a calm, measured rhythm. Inside, Eliza moved quietly among the children, smoothing the quilt over their small forms and brushing stray hairs from their cheeks. Mary and Thomas nestled close together, radiating warmth that filled the cold room. The familiar sense of cold, damp wool and lingering bread mingled gently, providing comfort and grounding amid the winter's quiet severity. The candle flickered softly, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls, giving the attic a tender, protective glow. Through the frost-covered window, delicate, crystalline patterns caught the lamplight below, glimmering like tiny frozen stars. The wind lifted subtle spirals of snow, which danced briefly before settling into the streets below. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, mingling with the cold air, and the distant echo of a horse's hooves traced a slow, steady rhythm across the silent city. Eliza rested her hands lightly on the children's shoulders and whispered soft, gentle stories of warm meadows, sunny afternoons, and safe, welcoming homes. Each word fell slowly, wrapping around them like the quilt itself, a shield of calm and comfort. The wind outside seemed to echo the rhythm of her voice, weaving through the eaves and the cracks of the window, blending the cold world beyond with the warmth inside. In the candle-lit attic, the room held a quiet magic, the soft warmth of the children, the gentle flicker of light, and the steady rhythm of breath created a sanctuary where life endured. Though winter pressed harshly against the fragile walls, love, hope, and tender care persisted, forming an unbroken cocoon of comfort and resilience. A slow, soothing rhythm that promised safety and rest through the long, cold night. The night had settled into its deepest hour, and the attic was bathed in the soft, steady glow of the candle. Outside, snow shimmered faintly under the dim light of distant lamps, drifting lazily down to join the already thick layer, blanketing the streets and rooftops. The wind whispered through narrow alleys, lifting delicate flurries that twirled in the quiet before settling again. A distant horse's hooves echoed softly, and the occasional call of a crow floated faintly, barely disturbing the hush of the winter night. Inside, Eliza moved gently, smoothing the quilt over Mary and Thomas, who huddled together like tiny, warm islands in the cold room. Their cheeks were flushed with warmth, and their breathing even and slow. The faint aromas of cold dust, damp wool, and lingering bread intertwined in the room, comforting and grounding, a reminder of the small but enduring comforts of life. Through the frost-laced window, delicate crystalline patterns shimmered softly. Tiny spirals and feathery tendrils of ice caught the candlelight and distant street glow, forming intricate, ephemeral designs that seemed almost magical. Smoke curled lazily from nearby chimneys, fading into the night sky, while the quiet streets held only the softest signs of life: a passerby's careful step, a horse, a fleeting shadow of movement. Eliza rested her hands lightly on the children's shoulders, whispering stories of warmth, sunlight, and open fields. Each word fell slowly, like snowflakes themselves, creating a gentle cocoon around the children. Outside, the wind seemed to follow her rhythm, curling through the eaves and brushing gently along the window panes, connecting the calm of the attic with the stillness of the world beyond. In the candlelit attic, life persisted softly and steadily. The warmth of the family, the steady rise and fall of breath, and the flickering glow of light created a sanctuary where winter's chill could not penetrate. Here, hope, love, and resilience endured, a quiet, unbroken rhythm of calm, a promise that even the coldest nights could be met with comfort and care. The attic seemed to hold its breath as the night deepened further. The world outside was a quiet expanse of snow and soft lamplight. The streets below glimmered faintly, muffled under thick layers of snow. Chimneys exhaled lazy plumes of smoke that rose and dissipated slowly into the winter air, carrying the faint scent of coal and wood. Occasionally, the soft clip-clop of hooves or the distant cry of a crow punctuated the stillness. Yet the city remained hushed and gentle under winter's weight. Inside, Eliza moved carefully, smoothing the quilt over the children, who nestled together like tiny islands of warmth. Mary and Thomas's breaths were slow and even, their small bodies radiating heat into the cold attic. The sense of cold dust, damp wool, and lingering bread intertwined gently, wrapping the room in a familiar, comforting embrace. The candle flickered softly, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough plaster walls, creating a gentle, protective glow. Through the frost-laced window, crystalline patterns glimmered faintly in the dim lamplight from the streets below. Tiny spirals and feathery frost etched delicate designs across the glass. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, blending with the cold air. A horse's soft steps and the occasional distant crow reminded Eliza that life, fragile but steady, continued beyond the attic's warmth. She settled beside the children, placing her hands gently on their shoulders, whispering slow, comforting stories of sunlit fields, flowing streams, and cozy homes. Her words enveloped the children like the quilt itself. The wind outside seemed to echo the rhythm of her voice, curling softly through the eaves and brushing against the window panes, connecting the safety within to the world beyond. In that quiet, candle-lit attic, life persisted softly and steadily. The warmth of the children, the gentle flicker of light, and the steady rhythm of breath created a sanctuary where winter's cold could not intrude. Here, hope, love, and endurance endured, a gentle, unbroken rhythm of calm that promised safety, comfort, and peace. Through the long winter night, the first hints of dawn began to creep into the sky, soft and muted, casting a pale lavender glow over the snow-covered city. The streets, still quiet and pristine, sparkled faintly as the first morning light touched the icy surfaces. Chimneys exhaled gentle curls of smoke that mingled with the crisp air, carrying faint scents of coal and wood through the winter hush. The city seemed to hold its breath, suspended between night and day. A world paused in quiet beauty. Inside the attic, Eliza sat beside Mary and Thomas, still wrapped together beneath the quilt. Their breathing was slow, even, and serene, the gentle rise and fall of their small bodies, a rhythm of enduring life. She smoothed the quilt one last time, pressing a soft kiss to each child's forehead. The comforting aromas of cold dust, damp wool, and lingering bread wrapped the room in familiarity, a subtle promise of safety and warmth. Through the frost-laced window, delicate crystalline patterns shimmered faintly in the soft dawn light. Tiny spirals of frost reflected the gentle glow, as if the winter itself had painted a delicate tapestry across the glass. Smoke from nearby chimneys curled lazily upward, and a lone crow called once before taking flight into the pale morning. Life continued quietly outside, moving slowly and carefully, yet it persisted, steadfast against the cold. Eliza whispered gentle stories, now of morning sunlight, of warmth spreading through fields and homes, and of new days filled with quiet hope. Forehead, her voice wrapped around the children like the quilt, steady, soothing, and unbroken. The wind outside seemed to soften with the arrival of dawn, curling lightly around the window frame and into the eaves, as though joining in the quiet rhythm of renewal and resilience. In the fragile candle-lit attic, warmth, love, and hope endured. The night had passed, winter's chill pressing gently against the world beyond, but inside life and care remained steadfast. Every breath, every heartbeat, and every flicker of light formed a slow, gentle rhythm that carried them forward into the new day. And as the soft glow of morning grew, Eliza allowed herself to relax, knowing that together they had weathered the night, and that within the quiet sanctuary of family there would always be comfort, safety, and a gentle, enduring peace.